And we kick off this evening with a look at the cinema.
I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
Cinema history come to life.
I found my solace in the small cinema I went to every Thursday night.
I'm a professor of cinema.
I go to the cinema for the stories.
There was no competition between the cinema and seminar.
I mean, it's not within the realm of conventional cinema.
And now,
here's Pace and Johnson
with a cinema review.
It is Monday, June 3rd, and a little after 8 EST, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Cinemaster's Reviews. Sorry for the late start. I had some prior commitments before this episode, but we have an exciting show this week. Not the biggest in terms of new releases, but still have some things to talk about. We're going to be talking about In a Violent Nature and Young Woman and the Sea. I say we jump right in, talk about the biggest movie this week. That would be Shudder original In a Violent Nature, directed by Chris Nash. This is a new horror film from Shudder, got a theatrical release. It is about a group of 20-somethings that decide to go out and rent a cabin just in order to camp out and just enjoy their time out on this lake. And while they do that, they end up essentially reviving the spirit of a dead boy by the name of Johnny. And Johnny has one goal, and that is to simply go and wreak havoc and kill everyone that he comes into contact with. But the unique part about this movie is that it is all told through the eyes and through the perspective of the killer. This doesn't really have much in terms of twists, or much in terms of turns, or much in terms of takes on that trope beyond that. But with that said, this is a movie that kind of lives or dies by its concept. And I think the concept, if you are into horror movies, I think overall it works by itself. I think this is a really great idea for a movie of, hey, we're just going to do this horror movie, but we are just going to be doing it through the eyes of this silent killer. The spirit of Johnny never really talks. You don't really get a good look at the character without a mask on until I want to say midway through the movie, when you really see how ugly and disgusting it is. And I think a lot of the issues with this movie, I think, is kind of forgiven by the fact that it is such a fun concept. You have scenes where you're just watching the human characters and the characters we're supposed to be rooting for, even though it is a horror slasher movie. So a part of you're kind of hoping that these characters do get killed. I think you'll have scenes where they're just watching, where they're just sitting and just sitting by the campfire, telling each other stories, and you're seeing it from either the first person view of Johnny, the serial killer, or you're seeing it from a shot where Johnny is off in the distance. While there are third-person shots in this movie, they're always focusing on the killer Johnny, except for a few times where the movie does break its code. In fact, if I'm being honest, those are probably the most annoying parts, is where we are just focusing on the human characters. It rarely ever happens, but when it does, it feels so alarming, because when you have a movie like this that is essentially a gimmick movie, you want it to stick with that gimmick of, hey, we're just focusing on the killer. We're just watching it from his perspective. So in the few times it does just completely break away, it feels like the movie is cheating a little. We've seen a lot of these types of movies where the killer is watching the victims from afar. But I think this one, because it is so committed to the bit, I think that's where it gets a leg ahead of those, and why this feels a little bit more fun to watch. It's also a little over an hour and a half, so it's not a very long movie by any means. So it is definitely live or dying by its gimmick, but it's in and it's out, and you can't really complain when you have a fun horror movie that does give you some pretty good thrills. The kills that happen, I don't think this is any spoiler, but when Johnny does start killing these camp goers, most of the kills are pretty fun. There are a few kills where you're like, man, these characters are really, really stupid by the fact that they're letting themselves die in such easy ways, especially later on in the movie. I think my tolerance with slasher movies is, I think the first few times a character dies, I'm pretty okay if it's in a dumb way, because most of the time the characters don't know they're in a horror movie. But if we are late on in the movie where half the cast is dead, there's a killer out there, and you still die in a dumb way, that's where I'm like, okay, that's pretty stupid. But most of the kills are pretty fun. There is one all-timer kill that, like, even as someone like me who watches a lot of movies and feels like he's seen like the pinnacle of like what you can do with blood and what you can do with gore, this is something where I was like, you shocked me and made me squirm. So I want to give this movie props for that. Like, this is a kill I'm going to be remembering for a long time. I'm going to be remembering what happens to the body after the kill. I think it's shot in a really, really cool way. But yeah, there are a lot of shots where we're just seeing these characters. Like, I think one of my favorite shots is we see Johnny looking in the forest at these two characters who are swimming on the exact opposite side of the lake. And we just see Johnny walk into the lake, and we don't cut away from the characters. And we know that Johnny is like swimming underwater. And I think that's what makes the movie so much fun, is it very rarely leaves the perspective of Johnny. Now, with everything I'm saying, it sounds like I really, really love this movie. I want to sing its praises really in a real high way, but I think there are just a few too many things that hold this movie back. One, the characters aren't very interesting. Like, I give the movie kind of props that, like, we don't really get into the minutia of like why these characters are camping, or if one of them has like a dark past or something, or whether or not one of them is like really dealing with some stuff, or characters cheating, and like it never really gets into that. But the characters are just such blank slates and so one note that at one point I was a little annoyed of like, you got to give me some reason to care. Like, I think eventually as the movie continues to go on, I think you kind of get like, it tries to do the alien thing of like, hey, this one character who was a side character at the beginning is the only character that's still living by the end. And I think around halfway through the movie, you realize that this is the character we're supposed to be rooting for. But even then, she's not really that interesting. And it kind of just leaves you like wanting, like, I wish there was something more I could sink my teeth into a little bit more. Also, I do think the movie was so focused on its gimmick and was so like, and Chris Nash was so proud to be like, look at this idea that I'm presenting, and I'm going to try to stick to it as the best I can. It didn't really come up with a great way to end the movie. I think the ending is kind of dissatisfying. Without spoiling anything, it kind of ends with a monologue that doesn't really have much to do with the events of the movie, at least on first glance. Maybe there will be like reports after the movie that says this is what these characters were really talking about. It ends with a monologue with a character that isn't really introduced until like the very ending of the movie. And at one point I was like, it feels like something was cut out of this movie. Like, this movie's around an hour 30. You could have got pushed it up to like an hour 40 and maybe put on like a couple minutes towards the end to explain like what's going on. And I think it would have ended with a little bit more satisfying conclusion. So yeah, while I want to sing this praises, and while this is a fun movie, and while it's fun to see horror movies experimenting like this, at the end of the day, it's a gimmick, and there's not really much it does with that gimmick, and that's kind of what makes me sad. With the exception of maybe like a few scenes, if I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I think I'm going to give it a barely passing grade of 6 videotapes out of 10, which 6 being a decent score. If you're a horror fan, I would recommend you check this out. And while this is kind of a cool concept, it is essentially like, it feels weird giving this description, but kind of feels like baby's first horror in just the actual story of it. Of like, if you're just getting into horror movies, this might seem kind of fun, but like with the exception of the gimmick, there's really not much with the story. There's really not much with the characters. And there's really not much that you're going to be remembering outside of it, except for the idea of this is a horror movie from the serial killer's perspective, from a silent serial killer's perspective. I do think that is important. Yeah, so if you're a big horror fan, I would recommend seeing it in theaters. If not, you can wait till this comes on streaming. You're not going to be missing much. But let's move on to our second review of the evening. Oh, I should probably take out the score. That being Young Woman and the Sea, directed by Joachim Roning, I hope I pronounced that right. He's the guy that did Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, the sequel to 2014's Maleficent. He's also the guy that's going to be directing Tron Ares, which is the third Tron film. And this is a type of movie we don't really get. We used to get a lot of, but we don't get too much of, and that is a uplifting and inspirational sports movie from Disney. This is a movie that takes place in the 1920s, and it centers on real-life swimmer Trudy Ederle, who became the first woman to swim from France to England using the English Channel. And it essentially chronicles her life from when she first started swimming with her sister all the way till when she finally does this huge huge rousing athletic achievement of a task. Like I said, this is a nice solid movie. It's pretty uplifting, it's pretty inspirational. Doesn't really attempt to go beyond that. And I don't really think that there's really much of an issue there. Like I said, we used to get a lot of these types of movies, whether it was Remember the Titans, whether it was Miracle, whether it was Glory Road, of, hey, we're going to take this sports movie, we're going to tell a really nice inspirational tale, and not going to be like super flashy with it, but we're just going to try to make it as effective as possible. And I think that's the best way to describe this movie, is this is effective. It seems like a remnant of the past. It's produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, so it definitely feels a little bit bigger than some of those other sports movies, so I'll get into that. But yeah, overall, I think this was a nice, solid movie. Daisy Ridley, obviously, I think most people know she played Rey in the new Star Wars trilogy. She's had 2 movies I actually like that come out this year. One of them was Sometimes I Think About Dying, which came out a little earlier in the year. And now this, I think she plays the character of Trudy Adderley very, very well. She adds a little bit of her like rambunctious nature as a performer. She believably is playing a swimmer. In my opinion, and yeah, I think she does a really great job of selling these moments where you feel like she's down for the count, where you feel like she can't get up, but she continues to keep going. I think the nice thing about Trudy that the movie continues to remind you is that she's never someone that wants to quit. Like, even when it seems like she isn't going to make it like these last few miles, in many of the attempts, the movie shows that she attempted to swim the English Channel. She's never someone that's going to quit, and other people need to tell her, yo, you need to quit or else you're going to slow down. Movie definitely hits the beats that you would expect for the sports movie, where like when she first starts swimming, she's not very good. She continues to practice. She eventually becomes the second to last person on her team, eventually becomes the best swimmer, does a few attempts at the channel, and eventually in the last one, this is a true story, so this isn't spoiling anything, is able to accomplish the feat that she sets out to accomplish. So I think Daisy Ridley's very good. Another thing I wanted to talk about this movie with is I think it captures the period and the look of the 1920s very well, with this being set in early America and early England. A lot of murky shots. You're in a lot of like watery areas, whether it's like on the New England side of America or whether you're just in England. A lot of grays. I think this movie captures like the overcast nature of certain parts of the world really, really well. How big like storms can affect the climate, and I think with Jerry Bruckheimer being someone that we know who can produce like these huge movies, I think it's really fun to see him bring that sense of scale to this sports movie. If I were to just talk about things I didn't really like about this movie, Christopher Eccleston plays the trainer to Trudy, and without spoiling too much of this guy, he's kind of like a mustache twirling trainer. Like, you learn that he's someone that has attempted to swim the English Channel many, many times and has never been able to accomplish it. And I think just throughout the movie, like he tries to pretend like he's in for Trudy's best nature and wants her to succeed, but I think the movie does kind of a bad job at portraying him as too much of a cartoonish villain without spoiling like what happens with him. And I think just like one point during the movie, like we learn that Trudy's parents want her to get married, so they try to set her up with this man from Russia who barely speaks any English. And I think this character was kind of just used as like this weird ethnic stereotype, and I felt kind of outdated for 2024. So that really wasn't very fun. But other than that, there aren't too many complaints I have about the movie. During the actual final swim that Trudy makes from France to England, I think was really, really thrilling. I'd say it's probably around like 30-40 minutes of this movie is spent on that last swim. A lot of chapters that happens, a lot of things sort of stall Trudy's process during this. There's a really thrilling scene where she comes across a like school of jellyfish, and she realizes like, what do I have to do? Well, I just got to swim through the jellyfish, and I just got to hope that I make it. And I think there's always like this point as an audience member where like you know what's going to happen, but the movie has you on the edge of your seat asking like, will she be able to make it? Like, is she gonna pass out? Is she gonna die out there? And I think the movie does a really good job at sort of balancing that suspense with your expectations. If I were to review this, if I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I think I'm going to go 7. I think this was a really good sports movie. I think Daisy Ridley turns in a really fun performance. I think it's a story that I think would uplift most people watching it. I know we've had 2 movies centered on female swimmers that have come out fairly recently. If you remember, Annette Bening was in Naiad last year. I think it's a much better movie than Naiad, one, because I think it's just directed in a better way. And it doesn't essentially drown itself out in like the unnecessary elements of biopic elements that Naiad had. But it's not a review of Naiad. This is a review of Young Woman in the Sea, which I think is a good movie. If you have the time, I'd recommend seeing in theaters. You don't really have to. Like, I do think there are better movies out there for you, but when this does come out to streaming, I would recommend watching it because it is a pretty good time. But yeah, that does bring us to the end of our episode. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the video so it helps grow our channel a lot. Next week, we are reviewing Bad Boys Ride or Die, the 4th film in the Bad Boys franchise, as well as The Watchers, the debut film of M. Night Shyamalan's daughter. Really looking forward to both those films. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and as always, watch more movies.
And the award for most vapid film review of the century goes to...
Okay, movie review. Okay, I thought it was beauty.
And he's now in cinema hell, where one day we'll all be reunited.
This is me at the Regal Cinema crying as I did through much of the film.